Hi, my name is Vuk and I'm the host of the Change podcast, where we introduce you to people and ideas shaping the MENA region. Today we'll be talking about building a competitive software-driven organization, do's and don'ts when building such organization that can save you a lot of money and stress, and the importance of managing and leveraging AI and data along the way. My guest today is Joe Devassy, General Manager, Digital Transformation Services at Omnix International. Prior to joining Omnix International, Joe spent 12 years with Microsoft and almost 10 years with Nokia, leading high-performing sales and technical teams, creating new business opportunities, and managing strategic partnerships. Joe, thank you for coming.
Welcome, happy to be here.
So, how's your week so far?
It's busy.
It's busy.
Yes.
How do you guys operate at the moment? We've been through a lot. Are you guys working fully remotely or having a chance to walk around town a bit?
Yeah, it's remote. It's remote right now. Customer meetings, interviews, everything has been remote.
How's your team performing now? You recently joined, right? Omnix International.
Yeah, it's been 6 months. Yeah, it's been 6 months of really hectic work. Yeah, especially because of the COVID situation.
Yeah, well, so today we'll be talking primarily about digital transformation. We'll try to deep dive into thoroughly understanding why is it so important. Before we get into that topic, usually in the Change podcast, we like to introduce our guests as humans, not as their roles with their company. Sure. So we usually like to start by, you've been in UAE for 30 years. That's probably you can be considered 31 now, yes. Right? You are in the higher, you're senior. So what led you to UAE in the first place?
So I finished my engineering 1989. And I wanted to do an MBA, but I could not afford to go to the US. I wanted to do an MBA in the US. So I had relatives here, and they suggested, why not I come to Dubai for a few years, earn some money, and then be able to afford the MBA. And I came here, stayed for got a job.
That was 1989.
January.
1989.
Yeah,
wow.
January 1989. I came here. I got a job, and somehow the magic of UAE and Dubai took over, and I haven't looked back since then. I mean, I did my MBA and all. I did MBA while working, but Dubai kind of got me, and I stayed since then.
And that was a totally different Dubai at the time. Probably there were some things that are still the same, but if you compare Dubai from 1989, you witnessed the growth and what happened with the city and the country. How would you describe that when you need to describe someone, Dubai from 1989 fast forward to 2020?
So when I came, the World Trade Center was the tallest building in Dubai. Yeah. Maybe in UAE. There was Hard Rock Cafe in those days.
Yeah.
What else?
It was beginning at the Dubai Marina, right?
Yeah, there. And the Sheikh Zayed Road, I remember, was a two-lane highway. Mm-hmm. I remember going to Abu Dhabi, and the headlights from the cars coming in the opposite direction would hit in your eyes, So those were the days. But I must say, if you think about what Dubai and UAE has gone through, you can almost, since we're going to talk about digital transformation, you can think about it as being a digital transformation completely. The rulers had a vision. They got the right people engaged to execute the vision. They focused on optimizing the processes, the infrastructure essentially. They use data, they use technology to benefit the citizens, right? Customers, right? So if you think about it, if you really want a good case study for a proper digital transformation, there's no better one than what they did in Dubai.
You must be using this in your sales pitch.
I do sometimes. But I truly
believe. Does make sense. It does make sense. It has all of the components and ingredients of a journey that companies are going through today. So for the good part of your professional career, you worked with two technology giants, right? Microsoft and Nokia for 22-3 years altogether.
Correct.
Now you switch to a different kind of business and you have a different kind of role, let's say. But you must learn a lot from these two companies. Can you summarize some of the biggest lessons that you learned from these two?
So I think about two. I think the first one is, I think both Microsoft and Nokia are the places that you would, recommend anyone to work. In terms of the opportunity to learn, opportunity to work with smart people, there's no comparison. I mean, both companies were top of the top. I mean, when I graduated from engineering, I never dreamt that I would actually get the opportunity to work for a Microsoft or a Nokia. And to me, that's been, truly a blessing. And, I've learned a lot from those two companies. The second thing I think that's, which I can talk about is both companies coincidentally, when in the initial stages, maybe 5-10 years ago, had this idea that they will succeed by a closed ecosystem. So Nokia was an example where they believed the Symbian operating system was the way to go. And then the Android came, the iPhone came, and it disrupted that model, right? And you can say similar to Microsoft as well, where it was a closed ecosystem in the sense in the early days, the open source was an enemy in the early days to Microsoft. Windows was everything in terms of strategy, in terms of how Microsoft went about selling to customers, right? But today, Nokia is on Android, and Microsoft has bought GitHub, which is the hub for the open source.
The open source
platform. And the biggest workload on Azure, guess what? Is open source. Companies like Red Hat is what's driving Azure consumption. So I think that's the other learning, that in today's world, a closed system doesn't work. So when you're selling to a customer, you are most of the times trying to integrate into an existing technology stack. You're not trying to replace. So this idea of interoperability is very important in today's technology landscape.
Wow.
Right? So those are, I think, the two key lessons for me.
Those are quite valuable lessons that you had to spend a lot of years to learn, and must be
absolutely.
very useful in everyday business.
Yeah.
So all right, fast forward these 30 years of your professional career across, those were Microsoft and Nokia for 20 something years, but then there were other also big organizations, and now you are leading digital transformation services for Omnix International, which, based on our pre-podcast conversation, I understood it's slightly different than what you did so far. So can you introduce us to the role, to what you do, and then we'll talk about the differences between these two types of businesses.
Okay, so what I do is I lead a team. It's essentially a techno-commercial team.
All right.
And our role is to drive digital transformation for our customers by supporting our sales teams to engage with customers. And what we really do is we are the ones who present the solution. We are the ones who do the pilots, the proof of concepts. We're the ones who take care of the architecture proposals. We're the ones who essentially technically sell to the customer. And what we do is we have solutions ranging from automation, virtualization, to cloud migration, application modernization, to data, AI, and customer applications. So, it's a broad portfolio. We also do software development, we do solution integration, and we also do managed services. So it's a mouthful, and it's like a big, set of solutions. But the way we approach customers is more about understanding what are the pain points that they have that we can actually bring a solution to. So my approach to customers with my team has been, when a sales account manager comes to us and says, hey, there's an opportunity with the customer, one of the things we spend a lot of time is to qualify that opportunity. To really understand at the core of it, what really pains the customer. Why is he actually looking for that solution, right? And a lot of times we have to say no, because maybe that's something we do not do, or that's something which even doesn't make sense to do, right? So in a nutshell, that's my role.
And you shared with me one interesting story before we started recording live, about what's changed in sales process from 1980s, 90s, when you were selling Intel 286s and 386s, and how that process of sales is done today. And then also the difference between Microsoft from 1980s, 90s and companies such as Omnix International in 2020s.
Yeah. So if you think about sales and how sales have changed, like I said, I've sold 286s and 386s as a box, right? Yeah. And in those days, the sales was about almost similar to selling a car. You were selling a product with features, and you were trying to impress the customer. How fast was a 386 compared to a 286?
Especially when you click turbo.
And turbo, exactly. There was a turbo button. And I remember the floppy disks.
Exactly, yes.
You were selling, I remember there was 30 MB and 60 MB. There were like two types of floppy disk. I remember Verbatim was the brand we used to sell. So, the idea was, how much memory do you need? So, is 100 MB enough? I say that's more than enough. So the days of selling, that I recall was more or less similar to selling a product on features. I believe sales have changed a lot now, especially technology sales. Today, I think, customers are very informed. You can't really wing it with the customer in a sales conversation. Because the customer probably has a broad set of technology stack where they are already experienced on, and you can't just go with a product to sell, right? You have to, in fact, understand the customer's technology stack. You have to understand where and how your product or solution will integrate into. So it's more technical today. The selling is more technical. It's more use case based selling than a product and feature based selling. So clearly, I've seen the end of both.
Yes, and especially because we at the moment, and we are slowly now switching to the topic of digital transformation. Unlike a 286 that you can actually get out of the box, turn it on, and run a couple of lines of commands to run a program and kind of showcase what it does. Digital transformation, it's kind of intangible, and you can't really that easily show it.
Yeah.
So we talked about painting the image and the vision of where the company could be if we would to follow a couple of these steps, implementing technology and so on. And it's a big topic, and we're deep diving now into it. So how do you usually describe digital transformation to your customers or to your friends or to people around you when you talk about digital transformation?
So because digital transformation is actually very different for every organization, I don't believe there's one single accepted definition that everybody would agree in a room. I remember just like a week ago, I was talking to a customer. My first slide was, how did we define digital transformation? And he stopped me and said, look, I don't think that's correct. And I have a different definition of digital transformation. So I think digital transformation is, something, if you want to kind of simplify really to its core, it's about applying technology to all areas of your business, and so that you can drive some impact out of it. and the key word here is all areas of your business, because it's not just about, getting your employees to be more productive. It's not just about, getting an ERP or a CRM system in place. It's about how do you look at end to end in your business, and how can you optimize and transform each area of your business. So that's how I would define digital transformation. Obviously, there are, it starts with the vision and so on. So there are components to a digital transformation which will make it successful or a failure, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned that a set of components, a set of ingredients, and you made a nice introduction about this topic when you were comparing Dubai, how they picked the right set of ingredients, and that's really essential for tasks such as transforming your organization. It became almost you don't need to say digitally anymore. It's transforming. That means it has to be digital.
You can only digitally transform.
Exactly, there is. So can you tell us a bit more about these components and explain us the meaning and the logic behind components and ingredients needed for good, actually successful digital transformation strategy?
Okay. So I think you can bucket these components in really four areas, right? And it starts with leadership, right? What's the vision that the leadership has? What's the vision the CEO has, right? Is it bold enough? Yeah. Is it ambitious enough? Is it looking to disrupt, right? Because ultimately, what is digital transformation helping you do? It's helping you become a successful company, right? In your space, right? So your leadership needs to have that vision saying, hey, we are going to disrupt, or we are going to change the way we develop products. We are going to engage with our customers in a better way, right? So it starts there. The second bucket, I would say, is the people. A lot of times we've seen digital transformation projects not succeeding because the people, the employees, are not bought into the vision. And they resist the vision. They don't believe in the vision, right? So there needs to be a culture element here, which means that if you haven't brought your people along with your vision, digital transformation will not get executed. Yeah. Again, think about the Dubai analogy, right? Your vision needs people to execute. Yeah. If you don't bring the people along, it wouldn't execute. So I think that's a second important bucket. The third one, often this part is neglected, and this is the role of IT. So when you think about digital transformation, you would think that, it's my IT organization's problem and they will drive it, right? It's not true, right? The IT has a role, but they don't drive a digital transformation, right? They support a digital transformation. And when you think about the role of IT today, right? So what are the KPIs of a typical IT setup, right? It's about, how good is my productivity software tools? How good is my ERP system or my CRM system? How good is my latency? How good is my storage, right? So the role of the IT KPIs is very much internal focused. It's about measuring performance and and technology parameters, right? I believe to drive a proper digital transformation, IT needs to have business goals. So IT should sort of move from being a cost center to a profit center, which means the goal of the CIO is also to see how can I improve or impact the top line? How can I impact the bottom line by using technology as an enabler, right? So I think this is a key, and a lot of people either put IT in the middle of leading digital transformation, then of course IT will lead it as IC knows how to lead it. Or they completely sideline the IT and saying, hey, we will come to you, but just make sure our internet is working and our productivity software is up to speed and our latencies are under control. We have a secure backup and so on. So it's just limited to their domain, right? So I think that's a third bucket that needs to be thought about. The last one is the technology itself, right? The fourth bucket is about the technology itself. So I think there are a couple of things to think about, when you think about technology here. One is you need to think about interoperability, right? And the other thing you need to think about is future-proofing your technology. I'll give you an example. You think about software development today, right? Okay. Let me take one step back before I get into software development, which is a more complex topic. So let's take cloud. Okay. Right? So when an organization thinks about digital transformation, they are thinking about modernizing. And when you think about modernization, you have to think about cloud.
Okay.
It's not if, it's almost when and how fast that will you move to the cloud. It's to me, there is no choice almost, right? If you might not move to the cloud today because there's issues with data residency and so on and so forth, data sovereignty, etc. But it's just a matter of time when cloud is almost inevitable, right? Okay, so fact is most organizations will be on the cloud. And the fact, again, is that you will be in a hybrid model, which means you'll have some of your workloads on-prem, some in a private data center, and some in the cloud, depending on what's the best performance and the most optimum way to distribute these workloads. So a hybrid model is what it would be eventually.
Okay.
So now come to software development. And what do I mean by interoperability and future-proofing? So when you're building software, you need to think about, hey, today I'm building software which will be on-prem. In 2 years' time, when my organization moves to the cloud, will this software be able to be moved to the cloud and work in the same way? Right? Can I lift and shift this? Or would I have to spend $100,000 to refactor and re-architect the application to run on the cloud now in 2 years' time, right? So the idea of container platforms today, for example, mitigates those kind of problems, right? So you can build a microservices-based architecture and you can containerize your software development, right? So the advantage of a container platform is that irrespective of where you reside, whether it's on-prem, on a private data center, or on the cloud, and again, most customers will have some workloads on an Azure, some on AWS. So how do you shift between the two? So you need to think about a container platform, which then irrespective of where you have built it, it can be put from one platform to the other without having to rewrite code, right? So when you think about technology, you need to think about interoperability and future-proofing them by considering those sorts of technologies, right? And not just build software today. And so this is part of your digital transformation framework to consider, right? Just like as important as considering people and culture, you need to think about, am I building for the future?
Yeah. I might consider calling this episode Digital Transformation 101, because this was one of the best explanations of digital transformation, high level framework, because nobody can really challenge this. This is simply how the fundamentals. Yeah. So I love the explanation. You've been.
I want to add one more.
Sure,
thing,
please. Yeah.
I missed.
Yeah.
So if you summarize digital transformation in sort of the sort of the four buckets, most organizations will need to think like a software-driven company to truly transform digitally. Right? So the way I see it, in 5 or 10 years, most organizations will be a software-driven organization.
That makes absolute sense, especially talking to me who is who is trying to help those companies as well. So and this is actually what I wanted to ask you, because I heard you talking about software driven organization before, and I would like you to unpack that term a bit more for myself and for our listeners to understand what do you exactly mean by that software driven organization.
Okay. So if you look around the biggest disruptors,
All right.
right, that has happened in the recent past, right?
Yep.
You look at Uber in the transportation business. You look at Netflix in the entertainment business. You look at Airbnb in the hospitality business, right? These are software companies, right? Software companies which have disrupted a traditional business. So if you go back, the 2000s, the early 2000s, you had the e-commerce wave. And you had companies like Uber, Facebook, Google, AWS, Netflix come along and disrupt a traditional industry, right? Again, transportation, retail, entertainment, and manufacturing maybe. So how did they do that, right? So the way they did that, they learned the lessons from the older generation tech companies like Microsoft, IBM, Sun, Oracle, and they applied those learnings to a traditional industry. And they built two types of advantages. One, time to market. So because they were a software-driven company, their ability to time to market, to launch new products and services was super fast. And the second, their ability to innovate was again, kind of very agile, right? And they could do this because of the way they were structured, their operating model, they were closer to the market, to the customer, right? And so they were able to sense the inflection points. These are those subtle changes in the run of the business faster than a company which wasn't as close to the customer. And then they were able to respond and take advantage of those inflection point opportunities by changing strategy or changing their product or driving an innovation to capture that opportunity, which a non-software driven company was unable to capture, right? And so essentially, if you're building a product-led culture within your company, essentially you're focusing on product development and product management, and then software becomes the core of how you engage with customers, how you provide services to the customers and products to the customers, how you innovate. That's to me a software driven organization, right? And this is again, how a digitally transformed organization looks like a software company. Pretty much all companies will become a software company.
I couldn't agree more. Companies don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Same like you said for cloud. You don't really have a choice.
Yes.
You either go cloud or you're not competitive anymore. I mean, it's just a matter of time. They say the best time to go cloud was 10 years ago. The next best time is today. You can wait, but it's just a matter of, and it's not easy for large companies to do these kind of major switches and changes, etc. And they, especially the ones who start, there's a big difference between Uber, which is a digital first company, if you call it like that. They started like that. That's in their blood. That's how they were structured. And for companies who are established and grew in the 70s, 1890s, 2000s, and now they need to switch. IT departments was always an IT department, and thousands of people in IT department. You can't just fire them all and hire all of these cool Uber kids to run your IT department. That transformation is quite challenging. And I couldn't agree more that same like cloud, software, every company will be a software driven company. They need to embrace software because that's the only way to stay connected. That's the only way to follow the pace of the industry change that is happening.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you will be marginalized, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of choice. Do you want to become a software-driven organization or not? You have to, because that's the only way to stay, to follow the pace of the change that every industry is going through. No matter, some of them are going faster, some of them a bit slower, but every industry is changing. But primary reason, as I see it, and you described it nicely, is that change cycle. How long does it last, and what's the time window that passes from the moment that you launch your product, collect the feedback, and you're able to adapt and adjust your product and launch it again? And there is one key element in the middle of that whole process, which is data.
Correct.
That is being collected on enormous amounts of data are being collected, and now the question is, and the challenge, how do you use the data? And then on top of the data, obviously, naturally, there is an AI layer, and how do you apply AI to increase and accelerate the usage and the conclusions that you're making with the data. So introduction to that topic of data and AI. What do you think about the influence of data and AI, the future of every industry, of digital transformation as well, as a kind of process?
Yeah. So to me, data is close to my heart. I mean, it's a favorite topic for me.
All right.
So let's start, with some fundamentals on data. So as the saying goes, data is the new oil, right? But to me, a better analogy for data is water, not oil. I'll explain why. We can argue, but I can explain why. So water is everywhere, right? 70% of the earth is made up of water. 60% of our bodies are made up of water. In some countries it rains, 12 months a year, right? Water is everywhere, plentiful, right? So is data. Data is everywhere. It's a typical company has loads of data. That's, structured, unstructured, semi-structured. A data is generated. When you say data is generated every time a customer posts a comment on your Facebook, every time a customer calls your support center, every time a customer walks into your showroom, every time you sell a product to a customer, right? So the touch points which generate data are numerous. Okay, like water, it's everywhere, right? Now, like water, again, you could harvest the rainwater or let it seep into the ground and get wasted. In some countries where water is scarce, you need to harvest rainwater because it's fresh water, right? And if you think about water, the fresh water is what's the problem, right? There is a lot of water, but the quantity of fresh water is the problem, right? Sure. It's all in 90% of the fresh water is in the Arctic, in ice, frozen ice, right? Even that's melting into the sea.
True.
So again, I'm giving an analogy that the same challenge exists in data. The issue is not the data itself. There's a lot of data. There's big data available, right? It's how you collect it and how you harvest the data. That's the difference, right? So to me, I strongly believe from experience that most companies need to think about data very seriously. And there are essentially 5 things that most companies need to think in the journey, right?
All right.
Those are, and the first step essentially is the data discovery, right? And what does that mean? Because in a typical company, there are multiple sources, as I explained, where data is trickling in, right? How do you systematically automate the collection of this data, in such a way that you don't miss any source of data? Okay, that's the data discovery phase. Of course, this is a massive topic which can take days to discuss.
We can have the change data series, and then each topic one episode.
It can be an episode itself, but data discovery in very high level terms, that's what it's about. The second is about data ingestion. What does that mean? How do you then take this data, raw data, and put it into a repository? Could be a data lake, could be a data warehouse. Collecting structured, unstructured, and semi-structured data. Semi-structured data is data which you would get from an IoT device, for example. An unstructured data is a voice message, right? A structured data is a database with customer name, detail,
Yeah.
So that's the difference between the three. So how do you ingest that data into a warehouse or a repository? That's the second stage. Again, this is a complex topic. It requires some level of some tools to do that. The third phase is about then curating this data, right? Cleaning and curation of this data and consumption of this data. That's the third phase. Now here you're talking about, cataloging the data, cleaning the data, removing the duplicates, making sure issues like data privacy are incorporated into the way you handle data, etc. So essentially you're readying and cleaning up the data for consumption. So in the third phase, you are ready, you know where the data is. It is in a structured and usable form. You can query this warehouse, so to speak, right?
Just to unpack and explain this for the listeners and the audience, when you say query, what do you mean?
Query essentially is you can ask the database a question in terms of, tell me the details of customer X.
Exactly. So the data is structured in a way that you can actually get the results out of
Correct. So basically the term used is the single source of truth. That's the term used in the data field. So basically what you're saying is that you have one repository whereby you have a single source of truth for that customer, if it's a customer you're looking for, because it has collated all sources of data. It has connected them, cataloged them, so that everything about that customer is in one place.
I see.
Okay, so that's the third phase. The fourth one is the BI and the analytics part, which is you then start to build dashboards for your senior management or for people, relevant people, which will visualize this data, right, in a graphical form, so that you can make sense of the data. You can derive intelligence from the data. You can connect the data. You can cross-reference the data, right? The fifth phase is when you then start to think about using AI, machine learning and deep learning, to sort of even more leverage the intelligence that resides in the data. You want to do prediction models. Then you start getting into phase 5, right? Yeah. What I have seen, and this is where, and this is why I'm describing what comes first and what comes second and third. So I've seen in my experience a lot of customers actually, put sort of the wheels before the cart.
I see.
Which is they would want to do an AI use case. But the first thing we want to know is that, do we have data to actually run this use case? Because in the world of data, garbage in is garbage out, which means whatever you feed the system is what it is going to base its decision and predictions on. So if your data is not clean, if your data is not adequate for testing and training, then your AI algorithms are not going to give you the answers that would make sense, right? So it has to follow rigorously through these stages to make sense for actually driving benefits.
So I'm going to just put the two things that you said together. You've said, as a part of your approach to your customers, first thing that you want to understand is what is the pain, what is the problem.
Correct.
And you're also saying that you can see a lot of companies starting from the starting point is we want to implement AI. And that's what I saw as well, and that's why it's so interesting. And then what I learned is that when you start, okay, you want to implement AI, I know, we all do.
Yeah.
one way or another.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a
I'd love to
buzzword.
go. I'd love to go home and
It's
let
a buzzword.
let the AI
Yeah.
work for me, and that's definitely, there's nothing wrong about that. But then when you start going a couple of steps back to understand, why and what for do we need to use AI, and say that you want to use AI for some kind of predictive something, predictive
Correct.
maintenance. But what usually a conclusion that the pain is not us not being able to predict something. The root cause analysis shows that the pain is that we are not collecting the data that can help us do the predictive maintenance.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And this is the sort of the learning that an organization goes through.
Yeah.
They've spent years not collecting data, or they've been collecting but not in the right way, or they've been collecting but not maintaining it, right? Because the database needs maintenance, constant maintenance and cleaning. So when you start digging under the surface, right? But let me take a step back on AI and let me kind of, qualify a little bit. So you could have a situation where a customer says, hey, I have a call center and I want to enable AI to make sure that when customers call me, it's a voice robot which engages with the customer. Surely you can do that. You don't need data to do that, right? So AI takes different forms, right? So just to qualify, what I mean is when you want to use AI for making business decisions, to make predictions, etc., is when you need the data. And yeah, it's a common challenge that we have come across, and most customers, I believe, needs to have a data strategy in place.
Yeah. Where do you start? So we had a nice episode with one of our previous guests about data-driven culture, and it is a hot topic, and companies do understand that data is important. But what is the number one obstacles in actually delivering on that kind of a strategy? Having data as your only source of truth, having data as something that everyone is looking at when they're looking for confirmation of their conclusions and strategies. How do you start with that kind of transformation?
So if you ask me for one thing that companies need to have a data-driven strategy is again going back to the digital transformation step number one, which is the vision. Because let's put it this way. So you're setting up a company with your own money. So, you have a vision saying that, hey, I'm going to build a product which will do X, Y, and Z. It's clear to you, crystal clear, right? Now, logically, you will say, okay, if I want to do X, Y, and Z, I need to have this type of data to be able to achieve these deliverables to the customer or to my, end target audience, right? So this is a very simplistic view of how that vision will drive your approach to data, right? So now take that into a large organization, right? So your CIO isn't going to systemically look for data and go through that steps that I talked about, the discovery, the ingestion, the curation, consumption. They will not, because it isn't asked for by the business. The business hasn't come to me and said, give me a prediction model of how much will my top 10 customers generate in 5 years' time.
Yeah.
Right? So they never asked that question. So I never went and searched for that data.
Exactly.
Right? So this is the two chicken and egg situation, right? So I think it starts with the vision. Your vision should trigger the need for data. If that doesn't trigger, I would doubt if your IT is going to spend time and money searching for data.
That makes absolute sense. So we covered digital transformation 101. We also covered data 101. So I'm going to struggle how to call this episode. but I probably will stick with digital transformation 101. Having these two in mind, I think this was an amazing, one of the best introductions to digital transformation and data basics that everyone needs to understand and be aligned on before engaging into discussions of this kind.
Absolutely.
Having this in mind, where do you see and how would you predict business evolution in next 10 years in UAE?
I think three things I would say here. One is I truly believe every organization, whether in UAE or no, India or Africa, will become a software-driven organization. This is a given. To me, you cannot afford not to be software-driven anymore, right? And again, I need not prove it because there's proof already, right? So if you are a CEO, you need to start thinking, how can software help your bottom line and your top line? So this is the first thing. And given, UAE's, the dynamic nature of UAE, I believe a lot of the companies are on that track already. So this is the first thing. I think the second thing that I believe will kind of shape us in the next 10 years is about how individuals, right? Just like companies will become software driven, individuals will become developers. Let me take this a step back. You think about 40 years ago,
all right,
50 years ago, right? If you used a computer, right, you were supposed to be a computer technician, right, or whatever, right? You were a specialist in that. Normal people did not use computers, right? Today, you carry a computer, your smartphone, you can't imagine life without a computer. Bill Gates' vision of a PC on every desk has been far surpassed today, right? And so I think, with the advent of the low code and the no code platforms, most people can develop a logic based application using those kind of easy to use software. In fact, even seasoned developers are no longer going to sit and code for long hours. Essentially, their job will be to build the wireframe and then put together different pieces of code and kind of assemble, like you assemble a car, you assemble a piece of software, right? So to me, citizen developers will be common in the coming years, right? And I think the third thing, which I think is a definite yes for me, is that pretty much every machine that you see will be AI enabled. Every machine. You're
not talking about computer only.
No, exactly. Literally every machine. Obviously, today, literally your car, your fridge, your washing machine somehow is AI enabled, but I think that will enhance. So enabling AI into any machine will become a common, thing which people will take for granted. So I think these are the three things which I see as a definite yes in the coming years, for sure.
Amazing answer. I love it. And if I would to ask you, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Retired. Ideally in Dubai.
Ideally in Dubai. All right. Then let's commit to doing the Change podcast season. This is second. So in season 12, in 2030,
absolutely,
to reflect on your career and see what happened in that previous decade.
Happy to do that.
Joe, thanks so much for coming and for sharing your knowledge with us. It was really it's really amazing. This was the best 101 explanation that I heard, and this is the intro to a series of podcasts that we can do on all of these topics, because this is just a surface.
Definitely.
And as we go along through the episodes, I hope that we're going to answer these questions in more detail.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting.
Thank you all for staying with us until the end. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, that you learned something new, or that we at least inspired you to act on your agendas. If you like what we're doing with the Change podcast, if you enjoy listening to our episodes, please like and subscribe. This would mean a lot to us. Share the episode with your family and friends and support us. Until next episode next Monday, stay tuned and we'll stay in touch. Take care, everyone. Thank you.